style on the Woodstock Company number 5 duty crew. Respond 1, adult female, knee injury, secondary to a fall at Tinker Toys, number 5, Bell Hill Road.
Hello and welcome to the very first episode of Behind the Lights and Sirens, a podcast dedicated to the emergency service workers of Australia. My name is Andy B, and in this podcast I aim to share some of the amazing, funny, weird and sometimes scary stories from past and present members from Australian police, fire, ambulance and the SES. I myself am an ex-police officer, and in the 5 years I served, I had so many amazing experiences. But after leaving the job and speaking with friends outside of the job, I was able to reflect on my time there and came to realise that my experiences were pretty unique. Some of my friends actually suggested that I should start a podcast about my time there, but if I'm being honest, it would be a pretty short podcast. So I decided to scour the internet for crazy emergency service related stories, but I couldn't really find any from Australia. I mean, there are plenty from the US and Europe, but I wanted to hear stories from Oz. I put out the idea on Facebook, which got an immediate and positive reaction. Friends who I had worked with started contacting me and reminding me of shifts that we'd worked together where this and that happened, and it was around this point that Behind the Lights and Sirens began. The format to begin with will be me reading a bunch of different stories which have been sent to me via email or Facebook, or stories that I find on the internet from various different sources. However, that format may change down the track as this is still early days. The stories will be anonymous for obvious reasons, with names and places left out. So if you're a current or ex-member of Australian Police, Fire, Ambulance or SES and you have a story that you could share with us, please send me an email at behindthelightsandsirens@gmail.com or get in touch with me on the Facebook page. If you're not in the emergency service industry but you do have a story that's relevant, feel free to contact me on the email or Facebook as well, and we'll see if we can get it on the podcast. Remember that all of our stories will remain anonymous, and if you do decide to send me a story, please leave out names and places, unless the place is pretty general or it's relevant to the story. For the first episode, I thought I'd just share a few of my own personal stories from my time in the force, with a couple of little gems thrown in between. But to kick it all off, I thought I'd share something that I found on the Melbourne Metropolitan Fire Brigade Facebook page. It was from June 7th and it was such a great little article, I just had to share it on the podcast. If you love a good dad joke, you'll love this one. It was firefighters from Hawthorn and Malvern to the rescue this morning when a hot air balloon crash-landed in Glen Iris. Incidents like these are a blimp on the radar, and you might be excused for thinking the report was a lot of hot air, but determined not to let the community down, our crews rose to the occasion and popped out to help. The situation was initially a little up in the air with 11 balloonists on board, but on a lighter note, crews worked quickly to help free the occupants and secure their ride. Although everyone was a little deflated, no one was a basket case, and this tale had an uplifting ending. Well played, MFB. Well played. This next story is actually one of my own. It's called The Magpie. I was working the div van one day when we were called to attend a family violence incident. We got to the address and another unit had come as backup. We walked up to the front door and the male who had called police was waiting for us. He was talking to us behind the screen door saying, "Oh, sorry guys, she's left already. It's all good. Sorry, I called yous." I asked the male if it was okay if we came inside and he said, "Yeah, all right, but come in quick so the bird doesn't get out." He opened the door and standing on the ground singing away was a magpie. Apparently they had rescued the little guy and now he lived with them as a pet. I blocked the magpie with my feet and gently ushered him away from the door as my partner and the two other police officers came through the door and crammed ourselves inside the world's smallest apartment. I grabbed my notebook and asked the male to tell me what had happened today, All the while the magpie was singing away on the ground as they do. Next minute, without any warning, the magpie jumps up and flies over to my partner. The male says something like, he's all right, he's just saying hi, he won't hurt ya. I can see my partner is totally uncool with the bird trying to get on her shoulder, and the occupant still was saying, it's okay, he's just saying hi. A few seconds of fluttering and awkwardly trying to get some unattainable distance in this overcrowded shoebox, and my partner yells, get this fucking bird off me! Mate, control your friggin' bird, I yelled, and the male apologetically made his way over and grabbed the bird from my partner's shoulders. But when he tried to pull the bird away, I could see that it had latched onto her earlobe and refused to let go. If you've seen the movie Dumb and Dumber, you'll remember the scene when one of the guys gets his tongue stuck on the ski lift. There's that iconic scene where the lady yanks his head back and the tongue stretches until it finally rips off. It was a bit like that, but with a magpie and an earlobe. The male finally manages to get the magpie away from my partner and is holding the bird while trying to tell me the rest of the friggin' story, but the magpie wants seconds and is desperately trying to break free from the male. Mate, can you get rid of the friggin' bird before you continue your story? I told the male. Oh, yeah, sorry, guys. Usually he's pretty friendly, eh? The male chucked the bird into what must have been the bedroom and closed the door. We could hear the crazed bird flapping around and singing away in there. I turned to my partner and she mouthed something along the lines of, what the fuck? And the male continues on like nothing had even happened. So yeah, I was saying, I looked over at my partner and saw that her earlobe had now started to bleed. So I interrupted the guy and said, Senior, we should be right here if you want to go back to the van and sort out your ear. She gave me a look that said gladly and marched out of there with one of the other officers. We finished up getting all the details that we needed from the male and suggested if police had to come back in the future, make sure the magpie was locked away. I went out to check on my partner, who was now standing by the van with tissue over her bleeding earlobe and a look of disbelief on her face. You all right, mate? I asked, holding back laughter. What the fuck? I just got attacked by a fucking magpie. And we both cracked up laughing. Shows your ear. She removed the tissue and there was a decent little gouge taken out from her earlobe. The bleeding had pretty much stopped by now, but it looked like it hurt. We told the sergeant the story over the phone, who half laughed/coughed and then quickly composed himself and recommended that she go to the doctor and get patched up and get a tetanus injection, etc. We had a good laugh and went straight to her local doctor. I still remember her reaction when her family doctor came in saying something like, what have you done this time? I got attacked by a crazy pet magpie, doc. When I got home, I went on eBay and bought her a brand new coffee mug with magpies on it so she could remember the day forever. She recently told me she still has the mug and she looks at it every day. I don't know if she uses it, but she said she looks at it every day. So that's something, right? This story happened when I was new to the job. I was at my training station and we were called to a couple causing trouble in the car park of a shopping centre. When we arrived, the two senior officers I was working with arrested one of the offenders. They looked over at me and asked me to conduct a pat-down search. I was super keen and quietly shitting myself as this was my first real pat-down search. Part of me thought, don't fuck this up, newbie, and another part thought, this is your big chance to prove yourself. You're super cop. You'll find drugs or weapons and they'll be so proud they'll carry you back to the station on their shoulders, cheering your name. I whacked on the rubber gloves, took a deep breath and begun the pat-down search. As I searched the cargo shorts, I felt something small and round and thought, you bloody superstar, here it is. Drugs. The other cops will think you're the best pat-down searcher they ever saw. What's in the pocket, mate? I said with my best cop voice. Nothing, it's nothing. The guy was obviously nervous. I looked up at the two senior officers and gave them a look that said, yeah, right, nothing. More like drugs. I carefully reached inside the pocket and retrieved the object. The male was not impressed and let out a big sigh. It was a latex cock ring with a vibrating egg. I'm glad I was wearing gloves. Nice work, Super Cop.
This was truly one of the strangest shifts I had ever had while working as a police officer. I've titled this one, There Was Something in the Air. I was working the Arvo van 3 till 11 p.m. and the first job was to attend an address and talk to witnesses in relation to an incident. We got there and I went outside and spoke to one party while my partner spoke with the other party in the kitchen. While I was taking notes, I started feeling a little lightheaded and it felt as though my pen was swelling up in my hand. As I wrote in the notebook, it felt as though the notebook was floating away from me, ever so slightly. I stopped writing and took a moment and the feeling subsided, so I continued on. I finished what I was doing and met up with my partner in the kitchen. I waited while he finished up what he was doing, and when all was said and done, we packed up and head back to the station to do some reports. On the way back, I told my partner, I think I might be getting sick or something. While I was outside, it felt as if my pen was growing in my hand and my notebook was kind of floating. It only lasted a couple of seconds, but it was weird. My partner looked at me wide-eyed and said, "Are you fucking serious? I had the same thing happen to me while I was inside. I felt lightheaded for a bit and had to take a moment." We started thinking back to what we had eaten, what we had drunk, had we been poisoned, did we just leave a meth lab, all the normal explanations. And as we pulled up to a roundabout to turn right, I noticed that my partner, who was driving, put his left indicator on. I said, what are you doing? He looked at me funny and said, "Heading back to the station? Why?" "Well, you've got your left indicator on to turn right." "Oh shit," he said, and quickly smashed the indicator over to signal a right turn. This clearly rattled him, and he said that he started to feel really weird, like he was getting the shakes or something. He pulled over to the side of the road, and we decided it was best for me to take over driving and head back to the station ASAP. When we got back, we told the watch house keeper the story, and she instantly got on the phone and called an ambulance. My partner wasn't looking great and had since laid down on the ground and had his feet up on a chair. I decided to call the residents of the house we were just at and see how they were feeling. "Hi, I'm one of the police that just left your address and was wondering if you or anyone else in the house has been feeling okay." I probably didn't say it like that, but you get the idea. I explained my concerns and she said, "Well, nothing out of the ordinary. I mean, I have been in and out of hospital lately with bad headaches." I calmly advised her that she should get everyone out of the house and that I would get the fire brigade to attend to check the air in the house, just to be on the safe side. "No, don't be alarmed. It's probably nothing, but it's better to err on the side of caution." "Okay, thanks very much. Bye." Click. Fuck. By the time I had finished my phone call, the ambulance had arrived and were checking my partner's vitals. I briskly walked past everyone, picked up the bat phone and told the operator the story while the rest of the office, including the paramedics, listened in. As I told the operator that the resident had been in and out of hospital for bad headaches, I looked at my partner and noticed the colour had rushed from his face and he looked like he was about to pass out. He quickly got up and ran down the hall to the bathroom and started throwing up. He was so loud that the noise of him vomiting echoed throughout the station and everyone did that half smile, half cringe thing you do when you hear someone throwing up. He was in the bathroom for a while, and while he was away, we spoke with paramedics who had now decided to drive us both to the hospital to get checked out. After some time, I went to the bathroom to check on my partner. He came out and I asked if he was feeling any better. After giving him a little shit, of course, about his ridiculously loud vomit noise. We both hopped into the ambulance. My partner was told to take the bed, and we waited as the paramedics seemed to be debating something. If we don't do it, they'll ask why we didn't. Yeah, good point. Hey guys, don't freak out. The paramedics were now wearing a biohazard suit over their uniform and a face mask. This is just a precaution. You guys seem fine. We all had a small chuckle about it as we made our way to the hospital. When we got to the hospital, my partner was wheeled out on the bed and I followed closely behind, but before we had a chance to enter, one of the doctors came running out and denied us entry. "I'm not having these two in my hospital with a possible infectious disease. They have to strip off and shower before they come anywhere near my hospital. I don't want the whole hospital getting infected." Fair enough. So we stripped off to our Rudy Nudies, bagged and tagged our belongings and showered in the emergency entrance car park. It was kind of hilarious. It was even funnier when I looked over at my partner, who was now a little unsteady on his feet and struggling to tie up his hospital gown. Do you need a hand, mate? I asked him. Oh, yeah, if you don't mind. We picked up our biohazard bags with our belongings and made our way into the hospital, trying as best we could not to let our ass hang out of the back of our gowns. And we were quickly directed into the quarantine room. From there, we had one window which looked out into the hospital. It was a little like animals in a glass enclosure. We could see the nurses gathering in front of the window, and it almost looked as though they were playing a paper, scissors, rock type of game. One of the nurses, I'm guessing the loser of paper, scissors, rock, started to put on a giant brown, full-body plastic biohazard suit. Once she was zipped up, and after a bunch of other nurses had taken some selfies with her in the suit, she made her way into the room to take some blood samples and check our vitals on the good old ECG. When she finished, we were left in the room while they did their tests, which took about 2 to 3 hours. By this stage, we were both feeling a lot better and were now laughing at the whole weird day. Our divisional inspector came to the hospital to check on us, which after a small amount of "I can't hear you" type hand gestures, followed by the universal "I'll just call you on your mobile" hand gestures, we were able to tell him the whole story. He advised us that the fire brigade didn't find anything unusual at the house. However, when they got there, the residents had opened up all the windows and the doors to air out the place. And that if nothing else, it's a good story to tell our grandkids. At around 3 a.m, give or take, the doctor came back, this time without the full-body biohazard suit, which was a good sign, and told us that all our tests came back negative and that we were free to go. We took a big sigh of relief, opened up our biohazard bag, got dressed and scabbed a lift back to the station with the inspector. This was hands down the weirdest bloody shift I have ever had. We later found out that there was a fair bit of investigation into the incident, and the only thing they found was that a neighbour had recently stripped his floors with an acid-type chemical and then had them resealed. They believed that this explained the residents' headaches and our experience. This story is called Knock Knock. I was working the div van one afternoon. I was the scribe, and as we were making our way back to the station, my partner noticed a heap of smoke over the road. I thought that maybe someone had just done a burnout, but my partner, who was driving, thought otherwise. She pulled off to a side street nearby, and sure enough, we could see smoke creeping out of the roof of a house in the street. She instantly got on the radio and notified D24 to send the fireys to our location. A few locals were now appearing, and we told them to stay back while we went onto the property to investigate. There were no visible flames at this stage, and I made my way to the front door to check if anyone was inside. This was the first time I had seen a house fire, and I was quietly shitting myself, if I'm being honest. The first thing I noticed was that whoever owned the place was potentially a hoarder, as there was a fair amount of junk lying around. I started banging on the front door and yelled out to any potential residents and listened for any response, when a neighbour came up behind me and told me that there was an elderly couple inside the house. Like a total hero, I told the man that I would take care of it and for him to wait out on the street where it was safe. When he was gone, I again bashed on the front door. It felt pretty light but was locked with a deadbolt. In what felt like a long time but was probably a few seconds, I had a short debate with myself as to whether I should just kick in the door. The irrational part of my brain said, "Dude, what are you waiting for? Kick in the friggin' door." While the rational part of my brain said, "Don't be ridiculous. That only works in the movies. You can't actually kick in the door." My irrational side, "So what? You'll just stand here like an idiot while a lovely old couple could be trapped inside? Kick in the door." Rational side, "Nope, not possible. The fire brigade will be here soon. They will do it." My irrational part of my brain had had enough and took control over my body, and I let loose with a front kick from hell. I hit the sweet spot near the lock and nailed it first go. The door frame exploded inwards as the deadbolt ripped it apart, and I stood in the doorway for a microsecond in a state of disbelief, fear, and adrenaline all mixed together. Holy fuck, I just kicked in a door, I thought briefly, and then snapped back into the moment as the kitchen went up in flames from the backdraft I had just created. If you've never been inside a burning building, I can tell you that it is bloody terrifying. It's surprisingly loud and friggin' hot, as you would expect. "Is anybody in here?" I called out and listened for a response. I thought I could hear someone walking around inside. I called out again, but no one answered. I was debating on whether to go and look when I quickly realised that the noise I had heard was the ceiling in the kitchen giving way. I backed out of the house and met my partner, who was in the driveway when the fire trucks arrived and did their thing. When the fire was out, we had a quick debrief with the fireys. They had done a sweep of every room and thankfully no one was home. "Who kicked in the front door?" one of the firemen asked us, sounding almost annoyed. That was me," I said sheepishly, waiting for him to give me a stern talking to about fire safety, etc., etc. "Ah, you bastard, that was my job," he said. "Oh, sorry, mate." "Nah, it's all good. I got to kick in the back door." We finished up there, and when we got back to the station, I told everybody who would listen, I can now tick off kick in a door from my bucket list. Now, this story has been titled Old Man Down. One night I was working the div van and a call came up to assist fireys locate an elderly male trapped under a fallen branch. We were given an approximate location of the elderly man and that he was currently talking to operators on his mobile phone. We were a little confused at first because the area we were given didn't really have any trees, plus it was roughly 10 p.m, so it was an odd time to be walking around in that area. As we got closer to the location, an update came through that the male had been located by the fire brigade. We were no longer required and the job was cancelled. We were about to turn around when a new job came up for us to assist fireys with an aggressive female at that last location. We thought, yeah, just their luck. They try to help a poor old guy and some idiot starts getting in their way. We took off to their location and suddenly everything started making a lot more sense. We could see the fire truck parked by the side of the road. Some of the fireys were standing back looking at a small bush and shaking their heads. As we got closer, we heard a whole bunch of swearing and carrying on, and two fireys were trying to help a heavily intoxicated female out of the bushes. "I'm going to sue the fucking council for everything they got and you bastards get fucked too." Or something to that effect. It turned out that one of our locals had had a few too many and walked home along the bike track. Along the way, she stumbled into a bush and couldn't get out, so she called 000. She's a little rough around the edges and was pretty pissed, so she wasn't making a lot of sense. When she called 000, she was trying to say that she'd fallen into a tree, but her story was sort of lost in translation, and because of her husky voice, they thought she was an elderly male. This story has been titled, You Don't Want to Hurt Me. One night we were called to assist a young female who had called police because her boyfriend was going crazy and cutting himself. The address was pretty much in the middle of nowhere and we didn't have an exact address as such. We eventually found a makeshift driveway that looked like it had been roughly cut with a dozer and traversed its way down into a little gully. It was pitch black, but we could see the faint light of the female's phone glowing below. We stupidly made our way down the ridiculous makeshift driveway in the super low div van and met the female at the bottom. We parked the div van, put on the spotlights and saw that her boyfriend appeared to be unconscious, lying face down on the ground with no shirt on. We asked her if he still had a knife, but she had since taken the knife from him and thrown it in the bushes. I carefully approached the male, OC in hand, and called out to him. He groaned slightly and, as I got closer, sprang to life and charged towards me. I yelled at him, "Whoa, mate, you're not angry at me, I'm here to help," or something to that effect, and surprisingly he stopped. The spotlights were in his eyes, which I think helped, and I could see that his whole upper body and both arms were covered in lacerations. Since I didn't know much about this guy, and he was covered in blood, I really didn't want to get into a wrestle with him. I knew firsthand that OC spray in an open cut hurts like a bitch, and if I sprayed him, it would be pretty bad, so I decided to use all my TACCOM skills. I managed to get a name and found out why he was cutting himself, and without a word of warning, he went into a mad rage again and ran over to this beat-up car that was dumped on the property and started bashing at the bonnet. I remember looking at my partner and we looked at each other with an expression of, what the actual fuck? My partner was a super experienced and lovable guy and was a total lifesaver on this occasion because he too didn't want to get physical with this blood-soaked rage monster, and together we managed to calm him down while the ambulance made its way to our location. While all this was going on, our divisional sergeant had been driving up and down the road trying to find us. D24 had been calling us on the radio for a sit rep, but we had really bad reception and hadn't heard the call. My partner kept the rage monster under control while I put on the blueies so the sergeant could find us. He also drove down the ridiculous driveway, and as he pulled up behind the div van, I thought, thank fuck you're here, and how the fuck are we going to get the cars out? We managed to keep the rage monster at bay by telling him that the ambulance couldn't speak to him if he was being aggressive. The ambulance eventually arrived and thankfully didn't drive down the driveway but walked down. They checked over the guy and he was walked calmly up the ridiculous driveway to the ambulance and was taken to hospital without any further incidents. We managed to get the vehicles back out with a bunch of Austin Powers style 30-point turns and a very rough ride up the driveway.
Well, folks, that's it for episode 1 of Behind the Lights and Sirens. Thanks for listening, and if you or anyone you know has any stories that you want to share on the podcast, you can send me an email at behindthelightsandsirens@gmail.com, or you can get in contact with me on the Facebook page. And remember to leave out any personal details like names and places, etc. Also, any feedback would be greatly appreciated, and I would be interested in hearing your thoughts on what you liked and what you didn't like. I imagine listening to me could be a little dry, so I apologise if that's the case. My aim for this episode was to get the content out there and gather some interest. I know a lot of emergency service workers are pretty apprehensive about sharing their stories to the world, so I thought this episode maybe sparked some interest or even reminded you of your own personal stories that might suit the podcast without causing any dramas in relation to privacy issues and all that sort of stuff. Anyway, my name is Andy B, and thanks for listening to Behind the Lights and Sirens. Have a great week.